Welcome back to another episode of Wreaking Havoc. I'm your host, Lucas Botkin, and right now, if the president is on time, he is live streaming about how he's finishing out his presidency and what that looks like. And if anything major happens, one of the guys up in the production studio is going to yell down to me what President Biden is saying in that pre-recorded show, or maybe it's live. But one thing I know, I probably don't have as many viewers as President Biden has right now, but I'm sure I speak much more coherently than he is currently speaking right now. But I want to thank you guys for tuning into this. If you are trying to watch both streams at once, and just cover a few things in particular regarding what a citizen defense industry looks like. Now, if you've been watching the news for the last, I would say, weeks, months even, you'll see just how crazy the world is right now. And I actually want the guys to run a poll asking if this year, 2024, is giving 2020 a run for its money. Now, you may think absolutely not, because 2020 was a year where we had just bad stuff and horrible stuff that lasted for the entire year. And so far in 2024, maybe we haven't necessarily had as much stuff that has lasted as long. But even in the last few weeks, I think we can all agree that some pretty serious, crazy and wild stuff has happened, including an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. Now, there was a comment that was made, and I kind of want to bring this up because I also want to try to bring us back to realism, because lots of people are concerned. One of my guys at work, we were having a conversation a couple days ago, and it was when President Biden went missing. Many people assume he might be dead, or he's been dead for a long time. And he said, "Who's running the show right now? We're rudderless. Nobody's in charge." And I looked at him and I just said, it doesn't matter. It's going to run anyway. They have a chief of staff. They have a whole org chart of who's in charge of what. They've got some of the, believe it or not, some of the brightest, most motivated people at those level of politics who are go-getters, people working 80-hour weeks, crushing at their job, whether we agree with it or not. So whether the president is around or not, frankly, he's just a figurehead, the country is still going to be doing things for better or worse. So one thing I noticed looking at Twitter for the last few days, and even today, I just kind of bounced out of Twitter because I was sick of it. There were really only a few things that were being talked about. One was the address that is happening tonight. One was the assassination attempt and people trying to wrap their brains around who could be behind that. And then again, even if we did know who was behind that, what would it change? If tomorrow some group came out and said that they were responsible for the attack, some rogue, agency group, or some extremists or something, how would that actually change our lives? What would we do with that information? How is that going to affect my day job when I go to T.REX Arms, when I go to my board meeting tomorrow? What is that actually going to do for most of us if we ever get the truth about the assassination? Now, I understand the fascination people have in wanting to know who's behind it, who maybe they shouldn't support in the future, but the reality is most of the things happening right now in the media, most of the things happening in Washington, D.C., including the protests that are absolutely wild, do not affect 99% of us here in America. And I was thinking about this because we watch the news a lot at T.REX and trying to predict what could affect the economy, what could affect T.REX Arms as a company. But I want to try to, turn from that conversation, as sensational as it is. I probably need to drink more rain, get a little more caffeine, and talk about something that's a little bit more productive, and that is, what does a citizen defense industry look like? You all have heard us talk about that a few times. And if you look up citizen defense industry, at least from the IP address I was searching from, nothing came up. The only thing that came up is the citizen research industry, something like that, or institute, which is like a training company that offers some training. And the video that I have on YouTube, a YouTube short from the Daniel Defense video of me talking about the citizen defense industry. Now, when you think about the defense industry as a whole, and you just picture it in your mind, what you can probably picture is something that looks like this. This is Lockheed Martin's, when it shows up on the screen, F-35 factory. There were a series of photos that were taken. There's lots of these out there. And you could just see rows of F-35s literally to the very end of the image, all being worked on. I don't know how long it takes to complete an F-35. It's probably a multi-month process of working on these. They're very expensive. But when you hear defense industry, you probably think of companies like Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, BAE Systems, munitions. You might even think about the intro from Lord of War. Now, on the flip side, when you hear citizen defense industry, what do you think of? Do you think of a bunch of guys in Flecktarn in the woods? Do you think maybe privately owned drones, a company making disposable drones and backpacks that accommodate them? Do you think small arms, just really good companies that make AR-15s? Do you think tactical nylon? I mean, when you hear citizen defense industry, what should it mean? What should come to mind when you hear that? Now, personally, I believe when you hear a statement like that, what it should be is the cultural understanding that it is a noble enterprise, it is a noble endeavor for citizens to take responsibility, the responsibility of possessing the means to resist enemies foreign and domestic, and not surrendering that responsibility simply to the state, where they can have a monopoly on violence. Now, if you ask the average person on the street, about this concept, and if they themselves should be concerned about it, the majority of people would say absolutely not, because that is a huge responsibility to think about. Do they need to fund the purchasing of armored vehicles? Do they need to be involved in various funds that are sort of National Guard style? Do they themselves need to go and train every week or once a month, similar to how some National Guard units train? A lot of people would say no, they don't want to take on that level of responsibility because they didn't grow up with that expectation from their families or from culture as a whole. So this is something that we've been talking about and trying to sort of digest, and we're still working through it. We do not have the answers of exactly what the citizen defense industry looks like, but I actually want to paint a picture for you of SHOT Show. Some of you guys watching this have probably been to SHOT Show. Some of you guys watching this have probably been to the big defense shows over in Europe. There's some big ones in Saudi Arabia. There's some big ones. I think there's a big one in Germany or France. And it is strictly for government entities who are purchasing multi-billion dollars worth of equipment. And the one thing, and this was actually kind of interesting, when I've been to SHOT Show, there are two kinds of vendors. You have vendors there who are there simply for government contracts. And you can usually tell these people apart from some others because they wear suits, they make certain kinds of equipment that they do not sell to the civilian public. And when you talk to them about the product, they talk to you, even if you're a civilian, like you're someone from the military, and they give you the sales pitch. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes these people are very particular about the products they make. They know exactly what customer is going to be using their product. When you go to the other kind of company at SHOT Show, or the NRA convention for that matter, you generally get a lot of consumerism. You don't get people who are marketing the product for truly what the product is for. If it's for hunting, they say it's for hunting. If it's a product that was designed specifically to incapacitate Homo sapiens, other human beings, they generally sugarcoat it. They don't tell you exactly what the product is for. They kind of dance around the issue, and they just say it's a weapon. Or they may not even say it's a weapon. They just say it's a firearm, for that matter. And for a long time, when I would go and talk to these defense contractors, and I realized, okay, you're just here to sell to the government. You really don't care about me. You're talking about how great your product is for being sold to government agencies, to dispatch of enemies of the state. Like, okay, I understand. And for a long time, it was a pet peeve of mine. I wasn't a big fan of it. But here's the thing, though. I can respect that they have a very defined customer base, and they are very serious about the product that they manufacture. They know exactly what it's being used for. Recently, we produced a video on the Armory channel of a concealable sniper rifle that goes in a laptop bag. Now, Rob, who we got to spend time with, and I've known him for a few years just through the internet, he designed that for a very specific clientele. And that was his mission. His mission was a very specific clientele who are using that rifle to engage other human beings. It is not for hunting Bambi. It is not for recreational purposes. It is meant for dealing with threats of the state or threats of that particular organization he is selling to. It just so happens he's also interested and willing to sell it to the public. But he did have a passion when we were talking to him about the individuals that he was selling this rifle to and the people who were acquiring the weapon, and he was very excited and happy about it. And the interesting thing is, you don't really get that with a lot of companies serving the commercial space. It's just they see consumers like myself, a civilian, as just a dollar figure. They see us as a statistic. They're like, yeah, we'll sell a gun to you. We'll sell this, optic or this military thing that, like a runoff of products or whatever it's called when they make too many or they make a little bit of extra to sell to the civilian population for more money. This is something that lots of companies do. I think SIG's a pretty big example of that. And so the question is, how can we start to turn that attitude that commercial companies have, or even some of these government contractors, to seeing the civilian customer base as noble, that they actually want to sell to us. And I think a lot of this comes down to how we present ourselves to these types of entities and to the public, which again comes back to the whole sort of discussion that we had, the lively discussion we had 2 weeks ago and started having about this industry needs class. If we want to be respected as professional gun owners or professional 2A representatives or professional Minutemen or militiamen, if we want to use the other M word, we're going to have to show ourselves as that. We can't look like clowns. And I've sat in meetings with some of these companies, these big defense contractor type companies, and they make fun of some civilian companies. They make fun of some and many demographics of civilian gun owner. And to be honest, I don't really blame them. I totally understand. When you're selling product to this professional organization that is going out there and actually getting work done, or people who are carrying a gun for a living, and then you have people over here who are just goofing off, like, yeah, I totally get it. I understand why you only want to sell to these people. Like, I don't blame them. In fact, when I talk to our own customers and I meet someone who's like, hey, I just started shooting my first match. I found your videos. I'm really concerned about the future of this country. I'm trying to be a little bit more prepared. I'm like, you're exactly the kind of person we want to sell to. And then there's other people out there who just are not that. We'll leave it at that. And I don't mind selling to those people. But there is a difference. There is a difference in who we're trying to equip here at T.REX Arms. And it's why one of our slogans of many is equipping serious citizens. And we're still trying to define what serious actually means. Now, a common thing that I see, and I'm sure this is in the comments, something that I've seen habitually on social media about this whole conversation about 2A and weapons of war and what kind of armament we should be able to own. The best argument that I hear, the predominant argument that I hear from content creators, gun tubers, consumers such as yourselves is, well, because of 2A, we should be able to own it, like a belt-fed machine gun or an Apache or a tank. Now, technically, I think that argument is correct. Like, that should be enough in order to justify us being able to own specific military armaments. However, my job is in propaganda and marketing. And I know that that statement alone is not going to be detailed enough or clarified enough if you're talking to a defense contractor, or you're giving a lecture to the public, or you're talking to a person completely new to firearms. You're going to actually have to sell them on why a belt-fed machine gun is something that the average civilian should be able to own. So the whole because 2A, it's like that it depends or MET-TC argument. Technically, it's not wrong when it's used in most contexts about certain questions, but it's not detailed enough to actually do any good. It's not detailed enough to give any proper or detailed information that actually sways the person. And I have a theory. Some of you guys might disagree or agree with this. If fully automatic weapons were legalized tomorrow through some Supreme Court ruling, and we all rejoice because it's like, yeah, NFA is gone. My theory right now is the large defense contractors, SIG, HK, FN, would not sell machine guns to the public. Even if they could, they would not do it. And it's because the culture is not there to support that kind of weapon ownership. And I don't believe those companies would recognize that civilians, regular consumers, are worthy of those types of weapons. Now, I would love to get to a place where a company like FN, who makes some really cool machine guns, I might add, and HK, as much as you like or dislike HK, would be interested in serving the civilian market with some of their military armament. And I'm not talking their semi-auto versions, because those are just stupid, like the semi-auto 249S. Like, yeah, I know FN makes that, but it's semi-auto. It's pretty much useless. Although the old ones were easy to modify, but you didn't hear that from me. But then the ATF got upset and they had to modify them and change them. So as we move forward with this discussion, and this is not a discussion that T.REX Arms is going to finish by any means. This is a discussion that has to be had by everyone, in my opinion, in the 2A space. Like, how do we advance firearms culture in such a way that we can win our rights back? Not just maintain them, not just maintain the little that we have, but actually win back things like suppressors, machine guns, armored vehicles, body armor never being regulated, night vision never being regulated. Like, I'm interested in getting rights back, not just conserving, although most conservatives don't even want to conserve the rights that they have. So this is the question that I think we all need to be thinking about, is how do we argue to, especially if any of us in the future ever testify before Congress or the Senate, the exact reasons why civilians should own belt-fed machine guns. Because 2A is not a good enough answer. It's not going to work. It's going to have to be more properly explained. And I've even run into this with people who are pro-2A, or at least they say they are, where they're like, yeah, but I don't see why a civilian needs a belt-fed. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's the most casualty-producing weapon on the battlefield, but not because of how deadly it is, because you use it to maintain a fire superiority while another group of individuals makes a flanking on that element. And at that point, I've lost them, because now I'm talking in military terms. Most civilians are not organized into groups like that, and so that just doesn't work. So this is all something that needs to be talked about and examined. However, I do have a concept and an idea that I think could be pretty interesting. So armored vehicles, you've heard me talk about this a few times. And one of the downsides to armored vehicles is they're very expensive. Even old, like Cold War armored vehicles and like APCs and stuff, they can range in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And a common sort of a idea that I hear tossed around is, people are like, well, it's too expensive to own, and we're not going to buy armored vehicles or some of this military equipment until a company like PSA makes them really cheap. Well, that's not going to happen. Armored vehicles are always going to be somewhat expensive. But we were talking today in the office about, like, how could a group of civilians, and it would be a group because you would need a group for this, how could a group of civilians actually possess specific armaments, specific equipment that normally the average individual is not going to be able to own? And I had a bit of an idea, but I'm going to show you guys kind of what I'm talking about first. So I get a newsletter. I get a series of newsletters about armored vehicles because it happens to be an interest of mine. I've driven a presidential Suburban that was for sale a few years back. Ended up being sold to a company in the weed business because they're required to transport cash and dope in armored vehicles in, I think, Colorado. But I drove it around in a parking lot, thought it was pretty cool. And this particular company, the Armored Group, has various armored vehicles available at different times, and they send me a list, including pricing, what armor level the vehicle has. And typically, a lot of these vehicles are used. So if we'll flip over to this screen, we'll kind of look at it. I have a Chevy Suburban right here with B6 armor. This armor can defeat .308 and other calibers below that. We'll scroll through. It has lots of fun stuff going on. It looks like your average run-of-the-mill Suburban. You drive around in it. It is armored. It can defeat rifle rounds. It's got run-flat tires, I believe, a fire suppression system. It's got the double doors in the rear. And the fascinating thing with this vehicle, including it looks like some little safe things, which is kind of fun. But the fascinating thing with this vehicle is it is only $85,000 at 25,000 miles, and it is ready to run and protect you from most small arms fire. Now, that is obviously, more money than most civilians are going to want to spend on some sort of armored vehicle. But this was sort of the idea that we had while we were talking in the office today. What if a group of individuals who are like-minded, and this is going to require community, were able to band together and form an LLC? Or whatever, depending on your state and your business laws, your tax laws, things like that. But came together and were able to put money into the LLC. And based on how much money you put in, that's your ownership and your voting privileges for how the money is spent. They pool their money into an LLC and then vote on how the money is spent on certain equipment, such as an armored vehicle or a Barrett M107 or some other capability that is usually too expensive for one person to own, but a group could actually own together. Now, you may hear that and go, well, that just sounds like communism with extra steps. But the thing is, this is private property that's still being managed by private citizens. And you could have an ownership structure where people could potentially get out of the core group. Their dollars count to a certain vote, depending on how you want to set it up. Maybe you need 80% of the dollars being voted for in order to purchase something. There's lots of different ways you could actually set it up and treat it like a business. There might even be some tax stuff you can take advantage of, although I kind of doubt it. Usually you have to make money with your LLC in order to write stuff off. And if this is just like an escrow or like an LLP or something, you're probably going to pay taxes on it and you're not going to get some crazy write-off. But the idea is a bunch of people could pool their money who are like-minded, who have the same goals. And I would even say treat it like a volunteer fire department. You decide to meet once a month to discuss the expenses of the LLC. And in that month you get together, you also train with the items. If you all pooled your money to buy a Garmin Chrono and to Barrett, then you shoot the Barrett 1 month. Later on, maybe all of you put more money in, maybe it's a percentage of your paycheck, and you go, hey, I think it's time that we buy ATVs or some other mobility type of equipment. And you actually start to acquire certain equipment that as a group you're able to pool together and have when most people cannot have it on their own. And as we kind of talked about this today, I was like, you know what? This idea is actually kind of cool. Maybe we need to do this first and show what it looks like. Now, it's going to require we find people who are equally or somewhat committed and are willing to put their money into it. But I think that's something people should explore as well. And I believe a lot of people could actually, or I'd say a number of people, could actually start to purchase and own and maintain, in the process of being well regulated, I might add, be able to possess certain armaments that normally they would not have access to. This was actually something that was really cool. When I was on the fire department, this was 10 years ago, or 11 actually, one thing that was really cool is we had access to a lot of cool equipment. There were Jaws of Life, we had tankers, we had certain vehicles, we had boats, we had all kinds of interesting stuff that me, as an average citizen, I don't have access to. But as soon as I was on this fire department, after the 64-hour training, after I was voted in, I had access to some of this cool equipment. We had training, we had monthly training. Some people were more committed than others. They showed up, they did stuff, and then some people did not. Some people did not take the training like they were supposed to. But that's the kind of thing I'm envisioning, is some sort of rescue squad style system where private citizens are able to be prepared, committed, conduct training, and also put their money where their mouth is and possess certain equipment. Now, one project that we're working on at T.REX Arms, I'm gonna give you all a little sneak peek. Because one problem with the citizen defense industry is defining, it's really probably the problem, is defining who the people are. Because we all know not everyone is equally committed. There's people who carry pistols, but they're not interested in some of the militaristic natures of what the Second Amendment is about. There's people who care very deeply about small unit tactics and night vision, but can barely shoot a pistol to save their life. So there's a wide gambit of the types of skills, capabilities, and commitments out there. And so one thing we're working on is a project that, and I've had this idea for the last 2 or 3 years, called Zero to Hero. Now, that's the working title. We're not actually going to call that when it launches. But it's essentially a collection of articles. It's a repository of articles and information that take people through sort of a 4-step process. And on this little tree that I drew, a little tech tree is basically the idea, like from a video game, you have different categories that start to span outwards due to how advanced your skills, your training, your interests, and what equipment you've purchased and collected. And in the process of creating this, we really dialed it down to 4 sort of classes of people, 4 classes of customer. You have EDC, people who care about their everyday carry, so they're interested in, a holster, handguns, probably some medical. You then have the concerned citizen. Usually those are the people who have a rifle, they might have body armor, they probably don't train a whole lot outside of that, but they're starting to get a little bit radicalized. They've got a little bit of stuff because they're concerned. The next level is militiaman, or whatever term we're going to come up with that's not so jarring. And those are going to be the people that are interested in defense. They are taking things a little bit further as far as what they buy and their training and their capabilities. And then there's Minutemen. Now, this was something that we talked about at length with Redbeard when he came out a couple years ago. He pointed out that the Minutemen from a lot of different societies, not just colonial eras, but like other ones out there, the Minutemen were typically individuals who could act as leaders in some sort of resistance movement. They were light infantry, they were sort of kind of special operations, but not really, but they were a step up from the common militiaman. So as we've sort of taken those 4 sort of levels of citizen weapons equipment ownership, and I would say capability, it's not just about what stuff you own, it's what you can actually do with it. We're starting to draw out different articles and concepts to build out to have this all in one place. And some of it is to educate people into what this looks like, but it also serves as a tool for inspiration. If someone's like, man, I've got my rifle, I've got my armor, what's next? They can then go to the tech tree, trace it out, and go, well, if I'm currently in this stage of how concerned I am, and I want to get towards Minuteman, it's going to mean these fitness standards. It's going to mean this sort of capability that I possess with this type of equipment. It's going to mean I know how to use a lockpick. I could get into certain buildings that are locked, because that is a pretty common occurrence sometimes. Even your own house. You might need to pick the lock to get into your own house because you forgot the keys or something like that. So this is something we're working on because the citizen defense industry is going to need a large deal of definition because there is a lot of confusion. And I don't think what we should do is try to model what the defense industry is, what the military-industrial complex is, because we have different constraints, less money. I mean, we're not just taking money from ourselves. That's what the government does. They take our money to spend on airplanes and stuff. We can't do that. We're using our money that's already taxed insanely to then try to have some form of preparation. So we have all sorts of constraints that the military-industrial complex does not have. Now, I would say maybe the benefit is we're not in an active war as civilians, or maybe it depends on how you look at it right now, depending on what's going on. But this is something that needs to be explored, and I'm hoping that over the years, as the citizen defense industry evolves and takes shape and is defined, it can be something that is truly noble, that other defense companies will respect, and in turn, support us with their equipment that they make for the military. Because let's face it, the equipment made for the military, it's the equipment that's actually being tested and abused and modified, and it's being optimized for that purpose. So as much as we can rely on the experiences of the military is something that we definitely should take note of. I saw a message earlier that nothing happened on the president's thingy, and so that's okay. Now, one thing that happens quite a lot is the battle of what ifs. Now, here's what I mean by that. Yesterday, I had an individual comment on my Instagram. Now, this happens all the time, right? And he said, your flat range shooting, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, your flat range shooting means nothing. You need to go into the woods and you need to freeze in a ditch, because that is what real small unit tactics and warfare looks like. And I responded back that, hey, well, this is true, but I can say the same to you. Your freezing in the ditch skills are going to mean nothing if someone's breaking into your house and you don't know how to shoot a gun very well. So the battle of what ifs is something that happens all the time as people are trying to determine what they need to be prepared for. Is it an active shooter situation? Is it a home invasion? Is it some Civil War, Red Dawn like aspect out there? And I think the most common what if that I've seen, and this was actually something that, before I show this image, a couple years ago, as the company was evolving, we were evolving our message. I was trying to figure out what the next step in T.REX Arms is, because we do a lot of flat range shooting, hard skills, which is very important to us. But there are other aspects people need to consider, small unit tactics, maneuvering, different things like that. And what was starting to become sort of the common theme for that was all this small unit tactics and rucking in the woods. So I started to develop like some content ideas, some vibe around that, like how are we going to make small unit tactics cool? Because I'm going to tell you guys right now, if you go film good small unit tactics, it looks boring, like super boring. It looks cartoony, it's make-believe, and it just looks corny. And what a lot of people think about when they're thinking about sort of Red Dawn, or they're thinking of some future Civil War scenario, generally the scenario that gets painted is some sort of fighting in the woods, just like in this slide right here. And they probably envision something like from the Red Dawn movie, the old one, not the new one. The new one was absolute trash. The old one was, you know, sad but good. Or something like Clear and Present Danger. So here are all these slides from when the paramilitary group is in the jungle going after drug cartels, and they're running around. It looks really cool. They've got M81, face paint, running around causing all kinds of damage in the woods. And it's obviously very cool. And unfortunately, they get ambushed, sold out, and all that good stuff. If you haven't seen Clear and Present Danger, I highly recommend. And so a lot of people envision this concept for what they need to be training for. And most civilians going out here and doing this, I think what they don't realize is, I personally believe, fighting in the woods is going to be the last thing that's going to happen. If a bunch of you go out into the woods while something crazy is happening, you're only easier to find. A drone can literally fly overhead, a good thermal drone, see 10 dudes in kit out in the middle of the woods where no one else is, so you're going to stick out like a sore thumb to begin with, and they're going to go, oh, there's that group we've been looking for. You're going to be found out before you can do anything. Versus, you're in the urban cities where you can hide, you can be in buildings. It's a little bit harder for drones and stuff to find you. And so that's just something that I find really interesting. You know, culturally, people think that Red Dawn is going to be the future conflict. And there's a lot of people now that are even saying that Ukraine, trench warfare, it might be what it looks like here in America. And I don't even think that. I think it's going to be very different. Now, there's actually something to contrast this. There's a scenario that takes place during the Special Forces Q course, during the course that graduates Green Berets, and then they go to an ODA, called Robin Sage. Now, when I heard about this, I thought this was the coolest thing ever, and I started to kind of wonder, like, is this something that civilians could have access to in the future? Unfortunately, probably not. This is a 4-week scenario that's conducted over 15 rural counties around Fort Bragg. Guys are sent out there, and basically what they're doing, they are operating as guerrillas. They are going out into the population. They are training the locals, various role players who are in on it. They can butcher people's chickens, and then they get reimbursed by the government. And they're running around with weapons and little armbands in the public, and they're conducting operations against role players. Around 500 people are involved, 400 to 500 people every time they do this. I think they do it twice a year. And it's a 4-week process. But they're doing the entire gambit. They're not just doing raids. They're winning hearts and minds of locals. They're training locals on how to do small unit tactics and probably some flat range as well. And they're coordinating. And there's logistics. They're not just running around in the woods. They're doing so much more than that. And if you're a citizen who is currently, someone who goes into the woods and does all the small unit tactics, I would highly recommend you look into the Republic of Pineland, which is their lore, their fake country, where they're going in and, liberating the population against the oppressive tyrants, and take from that as much as you can and apply it to how you're training. But they also have access to just a lot more assets and equipment. I mean, it's a thing that gets planned for probably months, and they've got like 400 people. It's like 100 role players, and then they have people in the populace. But I've even wondered, like, what if the citizen defense industry, over probably a few decades, could become so mature that even a county like Hickman County, where our company is located, could be in on something like this. Some sort of highly professional civilian class that is also very expensive to get into, where locals are part of it because they see the nobility in being involved in helping maintain prepared citizens. Wouldn't that be the coolest, dopest thing ever? Now, we're talking 30, 40 years of some culture that needs to change for that. But that's what I see when I'm thinking about the citizen defense industry, something like that. So that's just something that's really interesting that a lot of people don't realize. And just lastly, touching on the point about like where the fight is going to be in America, I have some fun stats. I was doing some research today. So 80% of the population of the US right now lives in urban cities. 80%. It's actually higher depending on how you rate rural cities. During the 80s, so during the Cold War and the content that was coming around there, it was 73.7%. So a lot more people lived in rural areas back during the Cold War, and over time we have become a much more urban population. But what's really funny is during the colonial times, it was only between 5 and 10% lived in cities and towns. So we are predominantly an urban-based population. And I believe the majority of the fighting that may or could happen and did happen in 2020 is going to be in urban cities. It's not going to be out in the woods. It's not going to be running around in M81 in the woods. It's probably going to be in cities. Low vis, weird, guerrilla type operations or guarding businesses. Korean riots, or the LA riots, I should say, rooftop Koreans, is probably what's more likely. And that's what we saw in 2020. So that's all things that are important to think about. But the last thing that I want to point out is nobody has this figured out. Like whenever I see the crazy what if scenarios online, like, oh, you've never lived in a ditch for months, so you'll die automatically. And then, oh, well, you suck at shooting because you're just like a veteran. You just suck at shooting, you're going to die too. Nobody has it figured out. Nobody has it figured out on exactly how much people should focus on which things. It doesn't exist. If we knew exactly, like if you knew exactly you were going to be in a gunfight in like 4 weeks, and you just knew 2 aggressors, they're going to have handguns, you could train specifically for that. You could focus on specific skills, you could focus on certain things, but unfortunately, none of us, civilians at least, who don't have specific mission sets, we don't have a thing to train for. We don't have a specific mission, purpose, like concept. This is one reason. I was talking to one of my buddies last night on Discord. We were not playing Elden Ring. We were playing 2042, believe it or not. And I asked him this question, and we were talking about it a little bit. He said, this is one of the beauties of a shooting competition. You could set one far enough out, you have a specific thing you're training for, and you can work towards that. Now, that's a shooting competition. That's not some crazy civil unrest, LA riot situation, but it does give you something to train for. And I actually talk about this quite a bit in one of the upcoming YouTube videos we have on the sniper match that I attended recently. I had a specific type of event that I knew I was going to go to. I knew roughly what kinds of targets I was going to engage. I knew roughly what kind of equipment I needed. And I spent 3 months getting ready for it. And that was enjoyable. I had a specific thing to work towards. I wasn't like shooting like an AR one week and then a sniper rifle a week and then my concealed carry handgun. I had a specific thing I was getting ready for. But unfortunately, as civilians, we don't have specific scenarios to prepare for. We kind of have to juggle everything all at once. And it's unfortunate. But there is one thing that I believe applies to all of us, especially during peacetime. There's one thing we should all be doing and can all be doing that's not even related to shooting, survival, small unit tactics, water filtration, CBRN, canine. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about civilian canine use, but that'd be interesting. And that is becoming exceptional managers of people. And I'm not just talking leadership of like you have 10 people under you. I'm talking like you're managing relationships. And I'm not necessarily talking about your relationship with your wife or girlfriend, or maybe you don't have one yet. You should look into that and not be single forever and forever alone. But you're able to work with other people. And the best way to do this is at your job. You're going to spend more time, here's the thing, this is kind of sad. I know I spend more time with people at my job than with my wife. That's just the nature of it. I'm at T.REX so much that I'm working with people all throughout the company more than I see my wife. And that's the nature of the beast for probably most of you, or a lot of you, especially people working 2 jobs. But just think about all the experience you can be acquiring through that process of learning how to work with people, learning how to diagnose what this person needs in order to get a project done, what you need to tell this person so that maybe you could get something across the finish line, what you should or should not say to this person, because all of that plays into some form of future conflict. It all plays into some sort of resistance, civil war movement. Now, unfortunately, the reason you don't hear people talking about this is it's not sexy. It's not cool. It's not CQB. It's not slow-mo breaching doors and doing cool stuff. But every single war and civil conflict out there has been based around logistics, planning, and managing people. You always have to have people to achieve victory. You can't achieve victory without people. So if you have a job out there, my recommendation is you maximize your time and your effort at that job so you can be the most prepared person when it comes to working with human beings. If you happen to work in the AI world, learn how to use robots, learn how to turn those to be on our side and not on their own, and that would be very helpful as well. Now, as you guys know, we don't do sponsors on this show. We don't sell out to other corporations. We sell out to ourselves. And one thing that we do on this show is we generally try to choose a product that we believe is important. And it's not necessarily a product that we sell. Last week, we recommended a book, and it was sold out, I think, immediately when we recommended it, which was kind of unfortunate, but also really cool. This week, because of everything going on with the riots and with the uncertainty, we decided that the most important thing that we could put on sale to save you guys some money is medical equipment. So right now, until probably midnight tonight, we have all of our medical gear, including pouches, on our website on sale for 10% off. So here's the medley of products. We have the raw products themselves you can put into medical kits. We've got fill kits you can buy, which kind of have everything bundled together nicely. And then we have the actual products themselves that fit the equipment. In the top left corner, you'll see the Pocket Med C. This is a new product that we launched today, designed by Brandon and our Navy corpsmen. They work together on this project, and Michael McMartin as well, our nylon director of nylon. And that's just a little pocket kit that holds a little bit of medical equipment. So you can run it in your back pocket, you can run it in your side pocket, you can run it in your cargo pocket if you're wearing big baggy cargo pants, have some bleeder equipment, and then you can have your tourniquet in your sidecar attachment or maybe in a different pouch. And the discount code is going to be Stop the Bleed. Also an excellent program that North American Rescue does. I believe they're free classes. And I would recommend you go out there at some point this year and take a medical class. Again, it's not sexy, it's not cool, it's not fun. Well, I actually think medical classes are kind of fun. But it's something all of us should know, and I actually need to go take a refresher. And I want to take the 7-day accelerated wilderness first aid course, because I took that, and that was super cool. But it is 7 straight days. Boy. So if you need medical equipment, you can save a little bit of money, or you can go to other places and buy there instead. Now, with all that said, we have some questions. I want to get into the questions. It sounds like nothing happened as far as Biden's address. The poll results, ooh, this is fun. 65% yes, 2024 will be worse than I don't know what the poll means. I don't know what it means. Yes, 2024 is just as bad as 2020 is what it sounds like. That's good to know. So I think that's roughly what the poll means, and that's pretty good. All right, so here's a great question from Wu Quan 2007. What would supply lines between in a civilian defense industry look like? What scale is reasonable to start and how would we go from there? What sort of infrastructure would you like to see come about? So the infrastructure that I want to see already exists. Now, it's generally used for the government, and that's just kind of like where it goes. I would love to see those companies see the importance of supplying civilian companies and civilian customers and actually set up separate supply lines. So we talked to a major company. I've told the story many times, but it is very substantial. It's very significant. At SHOT Show this year, I asked multiple companies this because I was curious, because we're sort of getting a room temp on like what's going on. And he said 6 years ago, 2/3 of their sales were the government. Now it's flipped. 2/3 civilian, 1/3 government, and that's with 2 wars going on, Ukraine and Israel. Well, if you want to call the Israeli war a war right now. With 2 conflicts going on, civilians is still 2/3. Now, that was mind-boggling to me because this company does a lot of government contract work. But it was also cool to hear. This company also makes expensive products. It's not a bunch of budget stuff. Like, it's expensive stuff. So I think a lot of the supply line is going to rely on companies like, unfortunately, SIG, FN, these large contractors. I mean, think about it. They have manufacturing capacity. They have manufacturing power. They have thousands of employees. They have all the machines. Now, whether they make good product or not, that's up for discussion, but they already have the stuff. There's no reason it can't be diverted towards consumer purposes and towards the civilian market. And that's why I'm really interested in going to companies like Daniel Defense and going to companies maybe like SIG and seeing, hey, how invested are you guys in the civilian market? Is it just for revenue because you need it because of like overhead and stuff? Or do you see the nobility in serving these people? Just as important as the government. Maybe even more important. That's one reason we went down to Daniel Defense. That's a big reason why we went to PSA. Although PSA is very upfront with they sell to civilians, they don't chase government contracts. Yes, that's very apparent that they don't sell to the government, and they get a lot of guns out there. So I think a lot of the supply lines is going to rely on the companies that already exist. But what I can tell you is we have 4 nylon OEMs, 4 different factories. And the reason we have 4 is 1 wasn't enough, 2 wasn't enough, 3 wasn't enough, and we're starting up a 4th now. And the POs we're putting in with those companies rival some of the government contracts, which is cool. It means that a lot of civilians are getting equipped. But it does mean that the textile industry is starting to get eaten up by consumer sales as well as government. So there might be some opportunity. If you guys are like, hey, I want to get into textiles, I want to be an OEMer, I want to manufacture for other people, I want to provide that service, I think there absolutely could be a need for that, and more capacity is always a good thing until it slumps. Chap asks, do you consider yourself the leader in the CDI? How do we get other name brand companies to stop shilling to the government and arm serious citizens? So, no, I do not think I'm the guy, myself personally. I don't even want to say T.REX Arms is, although I think we've been the first company to be this outspoken about it. And it can't go on forever like that. It's actually not going to work if T.REX Arms is the only company championing it. It's very similar to ammunition. If a company makes a really cool ammunition type, it's got really good ballistics, it's super accurate, it's awesome, everything on paper reads excellent, but no other manufacturer picks up the bullet or the type of round, it's going to fall flat on its face. If we're the only company saying that civilians should have a defense industry and maybe its own event that's separate from SHOT Show and the NRA, like it's very focused on like defense related equipment and stuff, you know, not beef jerky and like silver 1911s and stuff, but it's really focused on like specific types of equipment, it's not going to work. It's not going to work if we're the only company that's talking about it. I'm hoping with time, as this idea becomes, again, desensitized and normalized, companies will be willing to say it. Because right now, I mean, how many companies are going to say this? Probably not very many. because they're going to look and be like, well, T.REX Arms is the only one saying it, and we don't really know what they mean by that. It hasn't been properly defined. Are they talking radical extremist militia types, or are they talking really professional individuals who care about defending their families and their freedoms? Like, which is it? Is this Antifa, or is this something over here? Hasn't been defined yet. And I don't think we're going to see a lot of support for this idea until it is more properly defined, which we were trying to do some of today. I mean, we're having these conversations all the time at T.REX, which from a productivity standpoint is probably not the most productive because we're not getting like certain work done. But we have to do it so that we can provide good content and actually define these things. And we actually have a board meeting starting tomorrow. It's actually hilarious that I'm doing this till late, and then I have to prepare tonight and look at financials and stuff. Where we're going to continue talking about this. What is T.REX Arms, pursuing over the next 3 years? What does the CDI actually look like? Like, that is going to be the conversation for the next 2 days. We literally lock ourselves into a conference room and hash this stuff out. That's what we're doing for the next 2 days. A really fun 2 days, I might add. It kind of is, but it also kind of isn't. So I'm hoping more people get on board with it, but it's going to require definition, and it's going to require normalizing. And we are working on that. Desert Sky asks, in your opinion, what is the best way for an individual to spread the goodness of the citizen defense industry? I think the best way, and I've always said this, it hasn't changed. Talk to the people around you. One thing that I think, one strategy I think works really well, and some of this comes from all my recent experience with therapy. Highly recommend, by the way, especially if you're as messed up as I am, is be curious. Ask questions. When you're having a conversation with someone, you can be like, hey, what do you think about what's going on today? And they're like, oh boy, things are pretty crazy. Those people in DC are rioting like crazy, and we had all the stuff that was getting burned down, blah, blah, blah. And then you can be like, hey, do you know your neighbor? Do you have a community that's able to, protect yourselves if they come to your neighborhood? Do you own a business? Do you have a friend with a business and he's running the risk of his business getting burned down? And by the way, now insurance companies are starting to put in exemptions for civil war. So the whole argument back in 2020, oh, insurance will pay for the business, just let them burn it down. Yeah, that doesn't work anymore. Insurance companies are taking that out because they don't want to pay that money. So now you got nothing if your business gets burned down. Now you actually have a very legitimate reason, more than ever, to protect your business and your livelihood from getting burned down by a bunch of vandals. And I think it's a curiosity conversation. And I love to do that. I like to ask questions. I will tell this story briefly. I have to be brief about it. We have someone who works for us, not for T.REX. My wife and I have a number of people who work with us, for us. I'd say with us. I like to say with us, not for us. But this individual was much more happy, let's say, to hear about the assassination attempt. So definitely a left-leaning individual. And my reaction to hearing this was not like, you horrible person, you think this thing, blah, blah, blah. I asked questions. I was like, oh, you feel that way. Why do you feel that way? Why do you think Trump is this type of person? And we had a nice conversation. I mean, he's a middle-of-the-road individual who is definitely a little further left in some areas, a little bit right on some areas. And we had a good conversation about the assassination. And that came from me asking questions. I didn't just immediately like dogpile on him like, oh, you idiot, how dare you? We just had a nice conversation about it. And I really think that's how you get ahead with a lot of people, is being curious. Now, you guys are probably hearing that and you're like, Lucas, you don't mean that, because you say all sorts of things online that aren't curious. There's a time and a place for both. There's a time and a place to be curious with people and asking them questions. And I believe there's a time and a place to draw a line in the sand and go, right is right, wrong is wrong, or this thing is happening, we believe it's wrong or bad. And conversation will occur from that, including curiosity shortly after. So I think the best way you could do that is ask questions and then start to lead people into the idea that personal defense and the defense of neighbors, the defense of other people, the defense of our freedoms even, may be a responsibility that we all have to shoulder and not surrender it to the government, because we see how that's going. We definitely don't want to be doing that all the time. Monopoly on violence, yeah, we don't want that. Zach Church asks, what is the biggest niche in the citizens? Man, I love all these questions. So many on brand, on topic. So great. Citizens defense industry that needs to be filled, in your opinion. Again, I think to start, it's going to be definition. It's going to be exploring what this even looks like and means. I think that's the niche. And we gladly welcome ideas from you guys. comments from you guys, the discussion that's going to occur in the comments on this video. I think that has to come first. As much as I would love to start saying like explosives, drones, tunneling equipment even, you know, tunneling around the cities, living in sewers, certain equipment for sewer stuff, maybe not that. We're going to have to define what that even looks like. What is the type of conflict that we're talking about? Are we talking about offensive operations, or are we talking purely defensive, or defensive to begin with? The whole conversation around the armored vehicle, and actually our marketing director, he brought this up, our marketing officer, he was mentioning a bunch of people owning an armored vehicle, primarily for defensive purposes. And the example he gave was, if there is a bunch of business burning going on because it's cool again, and places are getting burned down, having an armored vehicle would be pretty cool because you could literally drive it to the front of the building. It serves as a visual deterrent because you maybe have a very obvious armored vehicle. It offers protection to the people inside of the business. You might even be able to shoot out of it, potentially. And you can use it for defensive purposes. Having an armored vehicle does not just mean you're going to use it for offensive operations. You can use it for all kinds of things. So I think the main niche that has to be filled is the definitions. After that, I don't know. I've seen some people ask for more belt-fed options for AR lowers, sort of like the Fight Light upper. Kind of cool, but also I'm not sure a belt-fed in that sort of configuration is what's necessary. I will say one thing I wish existed more was gun bags. It is hard to get a good bag that fits most rifles, even with a law folder, even a 300 blackout. Because you're dealing with a weird length of like 26 to 27 inches. It's larger than most backpacks, and you don't want like a weird square bag that obviously looks like a gun. I think some low-vis rifle bag carrying stuff would be really nice, and we may work on that in the future, because we may have to. The next question. Alvin Dean. Hey, Lucas, I'm in the Air Force, and I want to know how I and other service members like myself can be a beneficial part of civilian defense / the militia. Thanks. Yeah, so the first one, refuse illegal orders. I'm kind of joking, but kind of not. But you know that already. I mean, military members, at least I believe, are instructed to disobey illegal and immoral orders, and so that is a thing that you guys have. I'd say the most important thing is obviously absorb everything that you are around. Learn as much as you can while you're there, because you are in an institution. You are in, I would even say, a business. I like to think of the military as a business. Like, I know there's a bunch of legal stuff above it, and country, government, stuff like that. But let's say it's a business, right? They got money that's coming in. They got money that's spent. They have customers, enemies. Like, it is a business. The organizational structure operates a lot like a business. They have woke culture, just like a lot of businesses today. Like, the military is a business. Learn as much as you can while you're there, and figure out what you can share with citizens, civilians who are not in that type of organization, so they can be prepared. Now, ultimately, in the Air Force, I don't know what you do if you're a pilot or admin or something like that. A lot of what you do may not apply to civilians, but the principles of working in an organization like that absolutely can. So I would just say absorb as much as you can, and I'm saying this as a civilian speaking into your institution, but and then bring out what you believe would be most beneficial. And then obviously, you know, disobey illegal orders, you know, things like that. Just the normal stuff, you know, that someone in the government needs to think about. Be Dangerous asks, oh my goodness, HOAs. I'm dealing with mine right now. My HOA loves to help lower taxes and organize watch lists for the local playground. What could CD look like if your HOA took on organized defense? So this is what's funny. So HOAs, whether love them or hate them, and I'm dealing with some stuff with ours right now, which is kind of funny. It's not bad, but it's just like hilariously stupid organizational stuff. An HOA could actually be a very cool mechanism for normalizing certain defensive postures, let's just say. Because, I mean, you're probably in an HOA, or I think Ring doorbells have like a notification system for like the area when like suspicious people are seen, vehicles, robberies, like stuff like that. I think Ring has that service, or a couple others. You're definitely like touching on something that I think is something that should be thought about. A HOA could be used for normalizing defense. And that's probably something, if you're on your HOA board, you could actually ask, like, hey guys, we had riots in our city last year. Are you guys concerned about them coming out to our neighborhood? Like, and just kind of test the waters, test the room, test the board. And for all you know, half the people agree, they just won't say it. because it might be the uncomfortable thing to say. You might out yourself for being the paranoid gun owner, but hey, someone's got to say it at some point. So I would recommend, if you are on an HOA and you believe that, you know, it's not completely left-leaning, ask. Go, hey, I'm seriously concerned for my family. Like, what are we going to do in this, you know, what are we going to do in this HOA? Are we able to do something? Are you all willing to do something? And I think that is actually a way. You know, if you do have a community of people, honestly, an HOA is the most close to community thing that any of us are going to have locally, like next door. Explore that. If you don't have an HOA and you can maybe start one, maybe that's what you do. Maybe one of the pitches for it is safety. You say the purpose of this HOA is to promote safety in our community. Here's what we're going to do, and then you do everything off of that. So yeah, I think that's something that I want to study more, because obviously we don't, I mean, we have rental properties that are in HOAs, and you know, we're in an HOA, but I actually want to explore that and maybe find some what's it called when you have a case study, other cases that we can actually look at to see how other HOAs handle, you know, various watches and neighborhood watch, stuff like that. But I think you're touching on something that could have an impact for sure, and it could be a pretty cool avenue of normalizing some sort of community defense. Probably not offense, just defense. Nope, Sauce55. How should non-ex-military 2A citizens go about trying to work/interact with ex-military in building the CDI? Again, a lot of this comes down to the definition that we're all going to have to figure out. Like, what does it even mean? Does it mean civilians somehow pooling millions of dollars to afford tanks, and someone volunteers to keep it in their garage, and then they as a group operate the tank once a month in training? Is it strictly logistical, and it's just coordination and communication and lots of information sharing and intel? Like, what does it actually look like? So there's some definition and some curiosity that needs to happen. I think once that's done, then the conversation can happen with military guys, and I think a great one is, hey, what you guys did, what of what you guys did actually applies to us? Because let's face it, most of what the military does not carry over to a civilian population. It does not. The organizational structure, the mission, like what they're doing, it just doesn't apply. And that's where those guys, if they're willing and they're, you know, able, can actually take apart, you know, some of the pieces of what they used to do and try to mold it into, well, this is what it would look like for a civilian. That's what was really fun about having Redbeard come out here. We had some great conversations about citizen preparedness, and that's something he's actually been pretty involved with over in Europe. He's actually been a big part of traveling to some other countries and speaking at some universities over in Europe about getting citizens prepared, you know, just because of the war in Ukraine and what's going on, which is super cool. But he's trying to do that. He's trying to look at, hey, we were able to do all this stuff in the military. It just doesn't make sense for civilians, and just taking that apart. So, but again, it's going to require definition, right? Like, because I already know, like, am I going to be able to own an Apache and have enough money and munitions to field that sucker? Probably not. Like, that's not going to be me. Could Elon Musk? Yeah, he could. He could have Apaches. He could have like a whole, like, he could have a lot of stuff if he wanted, and maybe he does. He may actually have some of that stuff. But he also makes like ballistic missiles and stuff practically. One more question, and then we're going to close it out. Dobby with a redacted name. Thank you for redacting, and you know, maybe change your name sometime. Do you plan to make videos on each of the categories of your tech tree, and what you need to meet the criteria for each category? So the plan right now is articles. It is writing. There's some benefits to that, easier to reference, easier to get to. But some subjects will require videos to properly explain and demonstrate the context of the article. So the plan was/is we begin writing all these articles, or we flush out what the tech tree is in the 4 categories, and we begin creating the content. But we've estimated that finishing that project is going to take 2 years. It is a lot of stuff, and nobody has done this yet. So I'm hoping T.REX Arms can take a stab at it, can do a good job, maybe other people improve upon it later, and that we can provide it as an effective resource to define what the citizen defense industry looks like. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I appreciate you being around, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday.